memorandum, it's tilted in the way that shows an interest in your own situation and a mutuality of interest between the United States and Jamaica. Barbara?
If I may also add, I have noticed in 25 years in the Foreign Service, when I started, bilateral relations were very strong. Obama administration is very much interested in multilateral negotiation, maybe because he's a lawyer, but this is a high point. It's about being a part of a group or a force. It's much less about being a bilateral partner, which was so strong in the foundation of so much of our diplomacy before. But this impulse, this thrust toward regional representation and regional responsibility for difficulties started with Henry Kissinger, who insisted that diplomats learn more than one region, be efficient in at least 2 languages, and be able to pull your bilateral experiences from different areas into a discussion about the region. This is extremely strong in my outside observation of the Obama administration. On the area of China's investments and what they're doing, when we went to Cameroon in 1976, we found China doing exactly what they're doing in Brazil, building cultural centers, roads, hotels. They came, they brought their own people, and they left. They had small loans, but they established ties that they can call on in regional settings like the United Nations. That's where we see the payoff. So in my observation in this time, in this phase with Obama still 3 more years in, and the tendency in American diplomacy now, small states searching common interests, finding themselves in regional groupings, which I know most people don't like, but who would imagine that the Gulf Cooperating Council would become less economic and more political? We're seeing this right across the world. So it's something I offer in the middle.
The other gentleman, Mr. Da Costa, and Peter, we'll continue this over a glass of Remy. Mr. Da Costa points out that President Obama articulates that the United States should move from a war posture and rely more on another tool, which President Obama thinks is diplomacy. I think that's a true characterization of where the President of the United States' views are at this time. But it's not two polar opposites, diplomacy and military power. There is an area where they can march in tandem or can complement each other. I mentioned this last time when I said that many senior military officers or people who are moving up in their own military careers from many countries in the world come and study at our armed services universities. I taught at the Air War College. And there were about 250 military officers at Maxwell Air Force Base from foreign countries. And that the emphasis with Secretary Gates was more towards an understanding of the inner workings of these societies on the ground, and understanding what we refer to as cultural and social anthropology. That's now becoming a part of the military training. So that there is some kind of adjustment there, even the military side, that you cannot just use might in order to get your way. President Obama is on record as saying that he does not like to use muscle in order to get America's way, that there are areas for negotiations and accommodation and listening to different perspectives. He also warned, as we said last time, that he would rely ultimately on the military in certain situations, like to get bin Laden. He told you before in the campaign. He warned you. He warned the world. However, in the case of Iran, it's a more complex situation, I would think, than trying to just get bin Laden, even though that is complicated in terms of sharing of intelligence. Iran, a non-Arab state in that region, with a tremendous history of Great Persia, from Cyrus the Great. These people are emboldened by their own history to have the right to exert themselves in the region. However, the difficulty is that it's a theocracy. It's not a democracy, as we understand it. And this theocracy has control over the ideology, the prevailing ideology in the country, which is intertwined with Islam. In addition, the United States' closest ally in the region is Israel. And maybe the second closest would be Jordan, right? The monarchy that's a democracy. We have a long history of intense relations with Israel or the Jewish people in the sole Jewish state, that we feel in America, Obama, that he cannot jeopardize that relationship. Now, Bibi Netanyahu is not known to be the most I didn't want to say progressive, but not known for great equanimity. Let's put it that way, in a nice diplomatic language, right? Not known for equanimity, right? Knows America because he was ambassador in Washington, right? You're not speaking to a man, Mr. Ambassador. You're not speaking to Bibi as if he doesn't understand the dynamics of America. He is faced with the possibility that he might have come to supervise the demise of Israel, and that's not going to happen under his watch. So anything that appears as a potential threat to the very existence of Israel is dramatized by Bibi Netanyahu. Dramatized. Guess what? One of the biggest things one should know about America is a country of interest politics, interest groups. In fact, when I was a serious student a few years ago, I learned that interest groups explains America. If you don't understand interest groups, you cannot explain America. Well, guess what? Foreign affairs is an extension of domestic affairs in many instances. So the interest groups, AIPAC, right, is a major one. And by the way, the head of AIPAC claims to be a very good friend of Barack, right? From Chicago, they're from Chicago. That interest group, or those interest groups supporting the Israeli cause, have big weight in the decision-making corridors of the United States. If you don't believe it, then I suggest you do. Because, so Obama now, Mr. DaCosta, is faced with the reality in the region, the pressures on him, and his own vision. And it's not only the president's vision, it's his team of advisors. And they need not all be in Washington. He will call somebody whom he thinks knows about the situation and get a point of view informally, and you and I don't know about it. So Obama relies on diplomacy, but there are limits to a sole reliance on that, because there are some nefarious people out there. Let's be honest. There are a lot of people there who mean the United States ill will. You would agree with that? In Jamaica, when Peter criticizes or raises a question, it's not out of ill will, it's out of, equanimity, right? A fair look at the situation. So, in answer to your question, John Kerry, who was swift-boated years ago, is now the man carrying the what you call it, the torch. And he'll have to iron out with the players issues pertaining to Iran and Syria. Now, you can ask this theoretical question. Why do you are members of the nuclear group? You have nuclear power, right? So you have a non-proliferation treaty, right? And I want to use my nuclear capability, my uranium in whatever fashion, and I want to perhaps build some weapons. And you said, you cannot do that because this is an international agreement, non-proliferation treaties and stuff like this. And people ask this question, why should only those who have already nuclear weaponry deny others from getting it? And the answer is this. There are some responsible people in the world and some irresponsible. So we have to ensure that the irresponsible does not get that quantity or capability of weaponry.
Good evening, all.
Evening.
I don't want to distract or take too much time here from this very invaluable debriefing of the Scarlett. Let me just say that the fact that they have served in all these countries which normally would be thought of as undesirable diplomatic postings is a tribute to the esteem in which the U.S. State Department held them. You only get sent to posts like these if you are the top people. I want to just emphasize one point, which is getting on the U.S. agenda as a global superpower. You, as a small country, the attention of the U.S. is episodic. If you have a crisis, you might get on the agenda, but otherwise you're not on the agenda. If you're small, democratic, and middle income, you're not on the agenda. You have to find a way to get on the U.S. agenda, and the way to do that is to find a coincidence of interest between some entity or group or interest in the U.S. which coincides with yours. I'll give you an example. We could not make progress in getting CBI until we got the apparel manufacturers in the U.S. to oppose the trade unions who saw the CBI as sending jobs abroad, whereas the apparel manufacturers in the U.S. saw it as saving their operation because they could shift the labor-intensive parts to the Caribbean. Again, you have to find how to get on the agenda. We were struggling against Chiquita to have the U.S. withdraw their demand to dismantle the EU banana regime. And we were outmatched in everywhere by Chiquita. Influence, money, publicity, everything. We made no progress until we decided to switch the argument from saying it's going to be an economic disaster for the Caribbean, which meant nothing to anybody in the US, until we started to say it's a national security interest for the US. Then they began to pay attention. They said this is going to mean more drugs, more migrants, and that's how we got some traction. We didn't win. The last point I want to make is the point that if you're small, you have a small staff, you don't have resources for lobbies, you have to find a way to get on the agenda. And one of the points that Earl was making is that you have to find the key players. One of the ways to compensate for lack of resources and lack of strategic importance is to find people who can advance your argument. And that is how I discovered Earl and his wife, because I heard about this Jamaican in the State Department. And I made sure to find every Jamaican I could who could help to advance my argument. And I give you one illustration. We could never get to Newt Gingrich as chairman. But I discovered that his one of his key staffers was a Jamaican. And henceforth, we had no problem in sending messages to and from. The last anecdote is, to get on the agenda, you have to do unorthodox things. We wanted to see a group of senators, and as an ambassador from a small, democratic, middle-income country, you could wait months, so you may never get to see the senator. You may get an appointment and end up with a staffer. But I discovered that they were all coming to Montego Bay, Jamaica for a 2-day seminar on the Soviet Union. So I called the institute that was hosting them and suggested I wouldn't have the temerity to say that I, as ambassador, wanted to attend. I said, the foreign minister of Jamaica, David Ford, wants to join you in Montego Bay for dinner. They accepted, and of course, if the minister is going, his ambassador must go. I came down, and we had dinner with them. We spent several hours. I could never have seen them in Washington. You have to find ways to compensate. So I wanted just to reinforce the points that you were making. Thank you.
I want to put in a plug. We didn't discuss all of the kinds of diplomats that we have, but one of our strongest weapons are our business people and our commercial diplomats. They're promoting trade. They're like missionaries. They are everywhere in the countries. And I'm thinking about, for example, in Atlanta, where we have 25,000 Jamaicans all dying to do something, investing in Atlanta, sending things home, money home, etc. And I'm not sure that they are being tapped in the way that the Irish, for example, during the Northern Ireland Irish crisis, rallied their communities, gave them talking points, used their business contacts in the way you described, Ambassador. The best briefing that I ever got in my travels and trying to fathom a country came from our American Chamber of Commerce in Beijing. They knew the players. They were out when we had diplomatically to be withdrawn. So I say, as part of the arrows that you have in your quiver, you have your population on the ground wherever your target is, including in Jamaica. We would not have had the Polish issue, let Poland be Poland, without the Polish community rallying. We would not have what we have in the dynamics in Israel and Iran without that population on the ground. And in the same way, we have so many thousands of West Indians and particularly Jamaicans, and people doing business who have those entrees, and perhaps they need to be more broadly utilized. And this is not a criticism, it's just an observation that I witnessed in my 25 years, that our business community and our diaspora are very important tools.
There's nothing I can add to the ambassador because he's an illustrious diplomat, one of the best that you have sent abroad. One of, there are several here. And I think he reinforces that point very well, the Newt Gingrich Jamaican connection. Got to know who are the people in strategic positions to push your agenda. You got to do it. You don't have an alternative, especially if you're a small, middle-income, nice democracy, knows about parliamentary niceties and all of that. You have to be in this crisis mode. And when we are trying to do all of the stuff about trafficking of drugs and so forth, I'm sure now with the possible legalization of marijuana, that's a new dynamic in the relations between Jamaica or the Caribbean and the United States. Sir.
Yeah. Last time, Mr. Ambassador, we spoke about the Obama stewardship of American foreign policy and the perception within the United States.
Right.
I wonder if we could take it from the other side and ask, what is the perception of the world broadly, but important areas and important countries, of the Obama effect on the perception of the United States in changing the perception of it as an imperial power and as a Bigfoot in world affairs. What's your reading of the Obama effect on the perception of the United States as an imperial power, and how has that affected the diplomacy of countries engaging this regime under this leader?
Barbara, you poised to answer? Well, while you get your thoughts together, Professor, that's a very provocative and interesting question. And as I said earlier, the nature of questions say much about the quality of one's acuity. What is the perception? I argued in my paper, by the way, in the first paragraph, that when Obama came to power, the image of the United States was, I think I used the word sagging. And your question touches on now, what is the view of the world of Obama now, as opposed to when it was a sagging image of America? Well, I'll say this. I was in Versailles, France, in the Palais de Versailles on a vacation, and I had on an Obama shirt when Obama won. And people wanted to tear off my T-shirt and give me theirs in the middle of Palais de Versailles. That was how popular the euphoria, that it was global. You remember that, Barbara? So today, I feel that the world is a little more chastened, a little more introspective on this question, or not as forthright as they had been. In general, talking about publics, because Mr. Ambassador, Mr. Professor, I would like to also mention that sometimes the views of publics differ from the views of governments. You know, what Angela Merkel thinks about Barack Obama after he tapped her phone, and Dilma Rousseff from Brazil, perhaps one of the most powerful women in the world, who is the president of Brazil, had a state visit to come and visit President Obama, and they canceled like 2 days before, after he was tapping her phone. So I mean, there are so-called limits, but as I mentioned earlier, diplomacy is the second, intelligence is the third profession. And that brings us into the NSA, and that also affects Obama's image abroad, in addition to in the United States. And there's big controversy over the drones, right? So Obama is in controversy, and my wife and I don't necessarily agree on these points, so you will hear her view. I see she's getting ready. But seriously, I don't think President Obama's image abroad is where it was in the early part of his first administration. By all pollsters, and the real word is psephologists, people who study this sort of thing. I would be interested in reading what our embassies and consulates are writing about Obama's image in their countries and compiling that. Like, I'd be interested to see the messages being written from Kingston. Maybe people will hear our conversation, right? So Obama's image is, in my estimation, based upon what I've read about polling, is not as potent as it was before. But I don't think that Obama being president suggests an imperial America. Part of the problem for America's image before Obama was seen as the hegemon, the imperial power, Pax Americana. We had Pax Britannica, it was Pax Americana. What I think, what we were discussing last time, Professor, is that the leadership style of President Obama, which we broached last time, is that he might want to ensure the primacy of America, but I've mentioned primus inter pares, first among equals. But like Adam Smith, invisible hand, or deferring to some of his coalition colleagues like the French in Libya, and being supportive in the Central African Republic of South Sudan, of giving advisory help and so forth, and some materiel. So Obama, I think, President Obama wants the image of America to be more in light, more in the way of respect for countries, albeit America has an indispensable role in the world, and that it not be seen as hegemonic. Now, how people perceive people is a different question than what is the reality sometimes. Perception is a personal issue, because if anyone who studied fundamental psychology will say that your perception of the reality is largely due to your own socialization, your own psychic makeup, and your own idiosyncrasies. There is something to be said of that abundance of scholarship, right? So if you take that into consideration and you go into, say, let's say you were in, what's a place that dislikes America a lot? Well, let's put it this way. I know of a country that liked George Bush very much, and he is heralded it, even if he were at Albania. He gave a lot to Albania, which was the most backward part of the ex-Soviet Union. You remember that guy, Hoxha, who joined with Beijing against Moscow and all of that, and wouldn't allow anybody, and became a closed society. That society, that country, loves George W. Bush. He's like a king. So my point is that how people perceive leaders not only reflects the shortcomings or strengths of a leader, but their own position seen in terms of the policies of that leader, one. Two, their own idiosyncrasies and their own estimation of what constitutes a good leader. I can tell you this right here in this room. All of us, if we had a question, what are the prime qualities of a leader? And we wrote it on a piece of paper, there'd be a wide disparity of views. Now, what people perceive and what is real is another question. When you can empirically show that the president has taken this position, which is inimical to the interests not only perhaps of the United States in the views of the opposition, but also not a wise type of policy vis-a-vis a particular